a quick message before we get into this week's episode. For longtime listeners of the show, you know that Ian and I have been very reluctant to add sponsors and to add recommendations to our podcast. Our priority is to you, to the writers, and to the creators. And so we've held off to make sure that we can find partnerships that we feel good about and products that I can honestly recommend. And that's why I'm so excited to recommend this week's sponsor to you, Quillbot.com, Quillbot.com. This is a tool that I am personally using to build a newsletter that I haven't announced yet, but it's been hugely beneficial for me. So Quillbot is a paraphrasing tool. And the way that I'm using it is I'm scrubbing long form articles that are very, very in depth with information that I know my audience will really value and appreciate. And I copy that content and I paste it into Quillbot. And Quillbot paraphrases all of the text into a couple sentences, sometimes a couple paragraphs, to really shorten and pack in the information, which allows me to better piece this information into a curated newsletter that I am sending out weekly. For people that listen, you know that Ian and I really, really believe in the newsletter space. We believe that newsletters are great businesses to start, and you should start one. If you want to get involved in online media and start creating a business for yourself, a newsletter is a great place to start. And this tool, Quillbot, has been so beneficial for me in building this curated newsletter that I'm working on. It makes it so that I can jam pack a lot of information into not a lot of space. And it really, really has helped me format my newsletter and provide the information to my readers in a way that I know they enjoy, in a way that I know they can quickly digest, in a way that I feel really proud about. So once again, check out this week's sponsor, Quillbot.com, Quillbot.com. It's easy to sign up, and tell them that Tim sent you. All right, let's get on to the show. Eddy, thank you so much for joining me. You and I have been chit-chatting back and forth for the last year or so, and I'm really excited to actually sit down and have a conversation with you. Welcome.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. It's we were talking right before we hit record how copy blogger affected both of our lives in different ways. Obviously, in my case, it was kind of like it gives me a lot of nostalgia, because when I was learning about online business and about copywriting, that was one of the first resources that I discovered. So it's kind of come full circle. It's interesting how we met through social media, which was, long after copy blogger became a thing.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. Thanks again for the kind words. I'm still in shock about it, honestly. And it's been about a year now. But your comment actually transitioned perfectly to what I'd like to talk about. A lot of people who know about Copyblogger and about my work, they know me more of like a blogger and about an SEO. And I've been really transparent about my journey, especially on this podcast over the last year, getting into social media and getting into building a following on other people's platforms. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about it is because I think one of the things that you've done that has been smart and also like and simple is that you just say use Twitter, use email, and you can get to a $10,000 a month more business. Where my brain just doesn't work that way. I got too much shit spinning in my head at any different time, So it's been difficult for me to focus. But the simplicity of your message, I think, is like really pertinent. So I'm going to give this open-ended for you. You have on your newsletter, with Twitter and email, you can get up to $10,000 a month. What does that mean exactly? How would somebody go about doing that?
Yeah, I was very lucky, Tim, that when I was learning about online business / copywriting, one of the earliest guys I discovered, one of my, I wouldn't call him a mentor, but like a big influence in my journey is Ben Settle, who's very known for email, right? And what I like about Ben's teaching is that obviously he's biased because he's known for email, but one of the things he nailed into my head very early on is that you need to build your business around a platform you control. And like this aspect of ownership always stuck with me. And that's what I love about email lists. Like it's something that you actually control. And it's something where I always like the simplicity of it, because I think a lot of people, when they discover, again, copywriting, especially copywriting, is that they get overwhelmed with the abundance of opportunities you can use on copyright. You can leverage copywriting to generate income, right? So like I'm looking at the Copy Blogger website right now. You have under content marketing, copywriting 101, internet marketing, email marketing, SEO, landing pages, sales pages. And so like when you're coming across the stuff, it's like, it's overwhelming, right? You don't know what to do. And so like me, as someone who's always been like a simple-minded individual, I've always been drawn towards what's simple and what works. And to me, like, it's just so simple. Like you build an email list, you send valuable content to that list, right? It's kind of like building a readership of blog readers, except that, instead of like them finding you through a Google search, they actually opt in to receive your email. So every time you send an email, it lands in their inbox, they read it, and then if there is an offer there that makes sense to them, they click on the link and they go buy it. I just like how simple that is. But the other thing I like is that, like I said, you actually own that asset. So unlike social media, if you get that, or even say with Google, right? If Google changes the algorithm, it screws up your website traffic. Whereas with an email list, like that just never changes. As long as your emails are good and you have a reputable email service provider, like those emails are going to get into your inbox.
Yeah, everything that you just said has been the backbone of what I've tried to do. Like you mentioned before, we were talking off mic for a bit, and the way to generate the traffic in my case was always like SEO related. And in your case, it's been social media related. And when I say social media, like specifically Twitter, X. So I guess my question to you is why Twitter? Out of all the platforms, it's the smallest in terms of the audience, even though it's a lot more infiltrated into like public discussion, right? In terms of like users, it's still the smallest. I mean, I think Snapchat and stuff like that is a little bit smaller, but it's compared to Facebook and Instagram and all that, it's definitely probably, I don't know, a tenth of the size. So yeah, why Twitter? Like out of all the platforms, why did you choose that one?
Yeah, at the risk of like coming off as a snob, but I've always believed that people who read are tend to be a little bit more intelligent and have a higher caliber than people who don't read. And so just from a readership standpoint, I've always been drawn towards Twitter just because of the text. At least when it started, that may be changing. We can talk about that later. But when it started, it was the only social media that was text driven. And like, remember, like I'm a little older, I guess. Like, I think we're similar age, Tim. Where I didn't grow up with social media. Okay, cool. I'm 38, so like I didn't grow up with social media. Okay, so social media, I never liked it. But I made an exception with Twitter because, like I said, it was text-based. You're reading, people are writing. The content I felt was always of a higher caliber. The conversations and the content that I was seeing on Twitter as a consumer was always more interesting to me. Like I was never interested in Instagram because it's just like all lifestyle photos and stuff. And I mean, that's improved, but like these days. But like back then, I was never really interested in Instagram. YouTube, yes, I think YouTube is fantastic. But again, just being a reader myself, I've always preferred to read than I have to watch videos or look at images. And so just as a consumer, I've just always been drawn towards Twitter. And so like when it came time to build an audience, it was a natural transition for me because it was just purely because it's a written format. I think you're right. It's a smaller global audience than say Facebook, Instagram and so forth. But that never even occurred to me. Like, to me, it was very simple. It text driven. I'm comfortable reading and creating content in text form. So that was the natural path.
I do want to dig into what you talked about in terms of potential changes with Twitter. You tweeted recently. I should have just pulled up the tweet. I remember reading it and saying, like, okay, mental note. I gotta remember that. But something like, I believe that X is gonna be the future of social. There's gonna be audio. There's gonna be spaces. There's gonna be video. There's gonna be text, all into one platform. So again, kind of open-ended question, as somebody that has been in the what is it, that, like, you understand the culture of Twitter better, because all these platforms do kind of have their own, like, little subcults, right? They all think certain things are cool and they think other things aren't cool, right? As somebody who's been in there a while, what do you think is going to happen? What's going to be more important on Twitter? What's going to be less important on Twitter? Like, how is somebody prepared for the future?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So let's break it down. Let's look at the big picture. So we talked about the value of, like, why I like being text-based. But the other thing that I forgot to mention, and one thing that I think this is really what makes Twitter unique, aside from what I talked about with the text-based stuff, is that it's like the place where people come together and have conversations about current events, about what's happening in the world right now. That's, to me, that's always what's made Twitter unique. So if you are a sports fan and you want to talk about the latest match or whatever is happening in the world of sports, you go to Twitter, right? If you're interested in politics, and you want to get the gossip on, like, the latest political controversy, you go to Twitter. It's where people have live conversations. I think David Perel had the best analogy for it. He calls Twitter the town square of the internet, and so it's the best place. It's the only social media where people can come together and engage in conversation about what's happening in the world today. Okay, and so traditionally that was on a text format, but because of how advanced technology is now, and we see that with Spaces, we're now migrating toward live content, and that's when it's going to get really exciting. Okay, we've seen the changes in the algorithm lately, where people who publish content on Twitter, they're not getting as much engagement on their posts as they used to. Where what Twitter's tried to do is really try to get people to have live conversations on the platform. And so that's why your comments and your retweet quotes and Spaces, they tend to get more engagement now because they want you on the platform having conversations in live time. And so I think the future is going to be more, I think Spaces is going to get a lot more advanced. So I think it's going to go from live audio conversations to live video conversations. I don't know when that's going to kick in, but I would not be surprised if Elon and his team are building that technology in the back end. He's already mentioned that he's going to bring in a call feature, so you can, like, now have audio calls with people through DMs and video calls. And so why wouldn't he connect that with the Spaces feature? But yeah, the point is, it's going to be more live conversations, and, like, I think we're going to start seeing, like, video webinars and things like that all coming together on X.
You might be right there. Okay. I like to keep this podcast, like, tactical. I like to learn from people who are smarter than me, but every once in a while I'll dive into some of the esoteric madness of the internet. And so let's dive into this for a little bit. I want your opinion, because I think about live, and I think about this vision that it seems like Elon is trying to bring into reality, where he wants it to be, what is it in China? WeChat or something, like the everything app?
WeChat. Yeah. I think
Totally.
It's WeChat. Yep.
I think so too. If I got that wrong, forgive me. But what I'm seeing is examples over and over and over again where in the American markets, or just the Western markets, let's call it, the ability to create products that specialize in a certain thing and like be the best at that thing seems to be the way that we like to interact with each other. So for instance, Instagram has had video chat for years. I think I can do it on Facebook. I think I can do it on WhatsApp, right? I've used video chat on WhatsApp a few times when I'm talking to some of my friends who are international, but I never ever see myself ever using Twitter for a video chat when I could just FaceTime somebody. Like we've created these little pockets of technology that seem to be the best for a specific thing, as opposed to like a one thing that does everything. Because you can do that in a country like China, where they just basically say this is the one thing for everything. But I think it's really, really difficult to implement that when the video chat that I could have on Twitter might be pretty good, but it's not going to be as good as a company that only does video chat, right? So again, we're getting into like the esoterics of social media, but I spend a lot of time thinking about this as well. And I guess from your viewpoint, like, how would I even go about trying to do that? Should I spend time trying to get better at some of these newer products that, you know what, here's how I'll ask the question. You've been doing spaces recently. Have you seen spaces being advantageous for your growth on Twitter?
Yeah, I think so I gauge my growth on Twitter in the unconventional way. So like most people, what they do is they look at the obvious things, the obvious metrics. So they're like, well, my follower count's going up, my likes are going up, my retweets are going up, therefore I'm growing on Twitter, right? I don't think of it that way. I think of it as like, I look at things like, for example, how many people are looking at my profile? Because like, if your content doesn't make them think about, stop and pause, then and look at your profile, then it's not really resonating with it. The other thing I look at, this is the most important metric that people don't measure, is the quality of inbound messages you're getting. Now, if you're the second person to have told me that you're seeing me everywhere in spaces, that's intentional. I'm intentionally trying to get on more space. And I've noticed in the back end, I'm getting way more DMs from way higher quality people, just randomly DMing me saying, hey, I love that point you made on spaces. I love that email you wrote. I love that long form post you wrote lately. I'm getting more, even though my overall engagement is way down, like everyone else. The quality conversations I'm getting in the back end have gone way up, and that is the most important thing to me. So, so that's how I know that my appearance on these spaces is having an impact. Now, here's what's interesting from a behavioral standpoint of why spaces is powerful. So, it's the same reason why we're doing this podcast. Podcasts are like kind of like I think it was the guy who does Founders. He was comparing podcasting to like the what's that Project Gutenberg, the Gutenberg era, like the printing press era. He was saying like this is like the printing press era of technology right now with podcast, and I think that's because there is something primal about listening to stories and like listening to someone's voice. It's most direct channels to get into your head. That's why music is so powerful, and so that's why spaces is such a valuable feature, because you could read a million posts from someone, but unless they're like a really, really good writer, it is not going to influence and impact you the way audio content is going to impact you, right? I spoke to an email marketer recently. This is a really good tip. I know you talk about like the importance of technical tips, so this is a great technical tip for the email marketers listening to this. He said that if you can get someone to listen to your voice early on in your email sequence, what happens is they end up reading your emails in your voice. And that to me was like something that's super powerful, because like imagine if you had like a very unique voice like a Tony Robbins, and you opted into Tony Robbins' email list, And the first thing you got after the, when you opt into the email list, the thank you page is like a 20-second clip of Tony Robbins. Now you're reading all of his emails in that heavy, like thick voice that he's known for having. It's going to influence you subconsciously in ways that are more powerful than if you hadn't read those emails in his voice. Or if you opted into Arnold Schwarzenegger has an email list now, which makes me laugh. Imagine like reading his emails in his voice versus reading it in like a neutral reading voice. It's a completely different experience, and that's something you don't really think about. And so that's that little rant, Tim. That's why I'm so optimistic about audio and specifically about spaces. Just the fact that people can hear your voice. I guarantee there are people who follow me now, who've heard me on the space, who now read my tweets in my voice. They may not think about it, but I'm pretty sure they do that.
This is such a cool topic. So I wrote a bunch of stuff down because there's a lot I want to unpack here. I'm going to start with a little bit of a statement, which you don't necessarily have to react to, but this is the way that I think about it. In terms of all of the video chat and all that, I don't see that going anywhere. I think Spaces is probably the biggest opportunity for Twitter. And, and I'll tell you what I compare it to. We started calling Twitter microblogging in the early days. And a lot of people, they hear the word blog, but they don't actually know what that means. It stands for weblog. It just basically means that you have a feed of content that you can post, which is under one URL, as opposed to making static pages. So Twitter is basically a blog, but it's just microblogs. And so Twitter is microblogging, and I think Spaces is like micro podcasting, where if I'm on Twitter, I'm not necessarily looking to listen to like an hour-long conversation the same way I would on a podcast, the same way I'm not on Twitter to read, for me personally, like a 2,500-word article. I'm just looking for like little bite-sized pieces. And so I think you're totally right with the micro podcasting and with the Spaces. But the one thing that I thought was so interesting there is that recently, since I started this podcast, all of the messages that I've been getting from people where they feel like they know me, where it's not just some random DM, like, hey, it all starts with, I've been listening to your podcast and I love how whatever. And they're like, you're right. There's just a primal, authentic relationship building that happens through voice that can't happen through the written word. And this was like difficult for me to come to grips with because I'm like, I'm a writer. I can explain myself through writing. I still struggle to talk, like I have a Philly accent and I feel like, people listening to me like this fucking hood rat on the mic, you know what I mean? But I'm forcing myself to do it because of that relationship. And when you mentioned getting somebody to listen in your voice, I've known Pompliano for a little while. He's not necessarily like a friend of mine, like similar to us. We're just like Twitter buddies, And when I would read his newsletter, he would put the Substack podcast version at the front of his newsletter. And every time I would listen to his newsletter, I swear I'm reading it in his voice. And that's just a really, really perfect example. So man, there's like so much there that I think is important for people to get in front of. And I guess the specific question to ask you is like, now that you're coming with this new framework on audio, and like, let's just call it micro podcasting because we don't have a different word for it. How are you trying to implement that? Is your goal just to get on as many spaces as possible? Are you using Spaces for like a specific agenda? What's your plan?
Yeah, that's a great, man, so much to unpack there. First of all, I love that reframe of micro podcasting. I actually wrote that down. I rarely take notes when I'm a guest on the podcast, but I wrote that down, micro podcasting. So just to rewind there a little bit, and I don't want to get too behavioral here because I tend to do that a lot. But I think one of the reasons why audio, again, Tim, is so powerful is, it's the first. If you think about it, when you're a baby, like your mom and your dad are speaking to you before you can even speak a language, and so that's why it's so primal, in my opinion. Like your parents are literally speaking to you in a language you don't yet comprehend when you are born, and so like that's why it's such a voice and audio content is so powerful. But anyway, I don't want to get into that. But like to answer your question, right now I'm still in the exploration stage where I just want to be seen everywhere. So I'm hosting podcast. See, you already got me, Tim. I just called it a podcast instead of a space. Hosting
Fun.
spaces. I'm joining as a guest to spaces. I'm listening in on spaces. Like for example, 2 weeks ago, I don't know if you follow, but there's a great account. If you guys want to learn about X, there's a great account called NFT God, and he's making a lot of noise on the talking about growth and monetization on X. So I just casually listened in on one of on his spaces like 2 weeks ago, and he gave me a shout out. He he was having a discussion about I don't even remember what the topic was. Oh, he was talking about long form posts, and he gave me a shout out. He's like, "Oh, I want to get Eddy on stage because I want to hear his opinion because he's one of my favorite writers." Whoa! I didn't even know this guy even followed me. And so yeah, just being seen everywhere. That's kind of my intention right now. It's just to be seen everywhere. Like I said, like I know for a fact behaviorally that your voice is very, very influential. And so my goal right now, man, is just to like host as many spaces as I can and jump on as many spaces as I can. Like I'll go for a walk, Tim, and like I open up my X app. If there is a space that's somewhat related to me, I would just join. Even if I'm not speaking, I would just listen in. And here's another little tip for you people who are using Twitter. That little face of yours, that profile picture, that is by far the most important aspect of your profile. Because what's going to happen now, Tim, is that when people join other spaces and they keep seeing my face pop up, the fact that they just see me on every single space, that in itself is persuasive because they see me everywhere. And so there's that network effect I'm trying to go for. But like the short answer to your question, I don't really have any long-term plans right now beyond just being on as many spaces and just being exposed to as many spaces and seeing how different people are using it differently, and just basically I'm just learning. I'm just like a kid right now, just experimenting and learning as much as I can about spaces because it's just a gut feeling that I know that spaces is going to take off. It's going to be the next big thing. Someone else was saying the other day that the next Joe Rogan of spaces is going to be born in the next 5-10 years. I don't know about that, but I think that guy was onto something.
Yeah. Well, okay. Thank you for going down that rabbit hole with me. I enjoy those conversations a lot. We're almost 30 minutes into this, and I realized that I haven't actually talked about you and your business yet. So let me switch gears a little bit and talk about what you're doing. I had Dakota on last week, last episode, and the comment that I made to him is he's a little bit stealth in his products or his services. He doesn't necessarily promote his revenue streams as much as he just promotes himself, and then I think the business comes to him. And I've tinkered around your profile for quite a while. I know your newsletter, right? And like honestly, till this day, I'm still not totally sure like what it is that you do. Is that intentional? Do you like to keep your services and your products like on the down low? Do you think that helps you make more money, or are you just trying to build your personal brand, your platform as big as possible and see what happens to it? I'd love for you to just go wherever you're going to go with that. I want to hear the ramble.
No, it's not really intentional. It's kind of just accidental. A lot of it is just my fault. So like I've done a few different things. So when I first got on Twitter, I'll give you guys a little backstory. So my goal with getting on Twitter was to build my own audience because I was freelancing before that. I was doing freelance email copywriting. And I would get clients by sending cold emails, and it was fine. I got some work. I made some money. I got clients, but it was just kind of like I was sort of getting tired of the freelance grind. I wanted something of my own. So that was my reasoning for starting an audience. And then what happened was I grew very quickly on Twitter, and then people started DMing me for help on Twitter. And then ghostwriting was born. So I started ghostwriting to people. Like I started writing content for other creators and just helping them build your audiences up. I mainly worked with people in the health space. So like CEOs of e-com brands, fitness coaches, anyone in the health space. I didn't do that intentionally, by the way. That just happened to be a niche I was kind of familiar with. So I did some ghostwriting for a while, and a bulk of my income came from doing client work as an email copywriter and also as a ghostwriter. The reason why you don't see me talk about that a lot is because for some reason I just don't really talk about it too much. Because as I started building my audience, I was starting to get inbound. A lot of the clients came to me inbound. So like people would reach out to me. So for example, I would just, it's just the beautiful thing about Twitter and social media. You just make connections with people. So like you start talking to people in the DM. So like I have a lot of people, for example, a lot of fitness coaches in my circle. I just talk to them, and occasionally they ask me for help. So sometimes they'll be like, you know what, my engagement sucks. Like I'm struggling with this component of my business. And I'll ask them, well, okay, your engagement sucks. Do you have an email list? They're like, yeah, I have an email list. And I'll say, well, are you sending offers to that list? And they're like, no, I'm not. I'm like, well, I can help you get some clients for your email list. Like, do you want help with that? And they would become a client. And so I did a lot of client work in the back end, but I never had to really promote those services because I would just get referrals and inbound leads organically through my network. So what I'm working on right now is that, so I have a course on email marketing called Write Once, Sell Twice, which I promote through my email list. But right now I'm in the process of like reworking my entire backend. So I just launched a 4-week cohort, for example, teaching people how to build your email lists. I didn't promote that on Twitter. I promote that on my list because my entire business model is to use Twitter to build my email list, and then I sell things through my email list. Or like I said, if I get inbound clients, then that happens through my DMs, which you don't see obviously. So that's what's happening right now. Like I think my goal is like, by next year, I'll have a whole range in my offer stack, which I just sell through my emails.
That makes a lot of sense. I love how I have this concept, I guess, or this idea that the first thing that anybody should do if they want to be an entrepreneur is to start with a service business. And the people that listen to me are probably sick of hearing this by now, but it's just, I cannot understand this drive, or how, what is it, like the social carrots and sticks about how the cool thing to do is start a SaaS product and cash out on like $10 billion or something. That just doesn't make any sense to me because, freelancing is a grind. You use the word properly, but it's instantly profitable.
Yep.
You don't have to like do anything. You just need a client, right? Like you don't need a website. You don't need a marketing budget. You don't need anything. You just need a client, and now you're making money.
Yeah.
And then the skills you learn through that freelancing, it's almost like you get paid to build your platform, which is the exact opposite of what school is. At school, you have to pay somebody to teach you so that you can use what you learn to build your platform or to build your career or whatever. Whereas with freelancing, like you're literally getting paid to learn and compound your platform in the process. And so I love that you started with that, and then you used your knowledge and you productized it to a way where you could scale it to like that next level, and then you took that again, and now you're scaling it to the next level, which is products and a cohort. So I'm always thrilled when people use that model, and it reminds me that like, okay, no, I'm actually onto something with this. This is the best advice to give to somebody else.
Yeah, man. I think I put a lot of this blame on the aspect of like make money online, because like I completely get it. When I first started Googling how to make money online, all the sexy business models were things like, oh, you can just like put together a $10 PDF and just sell it, But it's like, what they don't tell you is like, it's not easy to get traffic. Like getting traffic is not like you just put together a PDF and
Totally
people
agree.
just buy. You have to build that traffic, and that's not easy to do. Um, so I think there's just a lot of ignorance that comes with that, and that blame partly goes to people who are overly ambitious. It's also partly to do with I mean, let's be honest. There's a lot of scammy internet marketers out there who sell the dream of like, you're gonna be a millionaire selling your $10 PDF, or you're gonna build your SaaS and exit $5 billion. Just sell it to freaking Facebook will buy your SaaS.
Yeah.
Like it's just not gonna happen. As you say, like the simple and yes, the very very boring path if you're looking to monetize online is to build a skill set, and then like thankfully social media, that's like a big shortcut now. Now you can start a freelancing business, and you can build an audience while you're doing that on the side, and then it may not happen today. Maybe you have to grind it out for 12 months or even 2 years, but in a couple of years time you're going to have your own business based around your name if you do things correctly.
Yeah, I love to hear that. Sometimes I have a personal newsletter from my own site, and sometimes I find myself running out of things to say because I'm like, I don't have anything to tell you other than just keep doing the same thing over and over again for like a couple of years,
Yeah.
And like sometimes
Yeah.
I'm just honest about it. Like, hey, look, I know that you guys are looking for some kind of shortcut or even just a piece of advice to get you some momentum, and I'll share all my experience with you, but it just wasn't like that for me. For me, it was I just woke up every day and I wrote blog posts on
Yeah.
Sober Nation. Then I got better, and then I got better, and then I got better. So yeah, I totally agree. I'm gonna get off my high horse on that one, and talk about this last subject, which, you are the third person in probably 2 months to talk about ghostwriting. And I never thought it was an actual viable business. And I had this with the same conversation with Dakota last week, but man, it just seems like this is more and more pertinent because what did you talk about? You talked about CEOs in the healthcare space, CEOs in the e-com space. People are busy and people don't want to deal with growing an audience on Twitter, especially people that have businesses to run. And the more and more I see this, the more I think like, wow, this is a real thing. Ghostwriting is a real thing. It's not some kind of like just little fling on the side that doesn't really amount to much, right? Like this is a real deal business model now in a way that it wasn't 5 or 10 years ago, because people are busy. And busy people need to have audiences. Like you just, like it or not, a personal brand is such a huge asset that CEOs are just willing to pay for. Like, yeah, sure, here's some money, build my shit for me. So with that being a little bit of a runway for you to talk about it, what do you think the future of ghostwriting looks like? Is that a viable business for somebody who's listening to this to start? Or is it just still like a come and go type deal?
Okay, I don't think it's a good business to start because I get this a lot. Like people with like some 18-year-old kid with like 100 followers would DM me and say, "Hey, I can help you. I can help blow up your brand." And they don't realize how
happens like 5 times a day.
Dude, they don't realize the irony of it. It's like, I have 155,000 followers. You have 100 followers, and you're telling me you're going to blow up my brand. It doesn't make any sense. Let's just say I have like 1,000 followers. It still doesn't make any sense, right? And so I think it's on paper. This is, again, it comes from ignorance. On paper, ghostwriting sounds really viable. Oh, you just learn how to write tweets and you just do it for someone else. But it's not as simple as it sounds. You actually have to. I know it sounds crazy, but tweet writing, building an audience, that in itself is a skill set. And to develop a skill set, you have to practice it, as you were saying. Just like blog, it's no different to blog writing, in the sense that you have to develop the skill. You have to actually practice it. And so I don't think it's a viable skill set for beginners. in terms of where it's going in the future, I actually think ghostwriting's been around for a long time. It's not anything new. Like we just think of it as ghostwriting on that little corner on Twitter, but like freaking politicians and celebrities, they have these people called publicists. That's what a ghostwriter is. They build their public persona. Okay. The reason why Donald Trump was such an interesting politician is because when you read his tweets, there's no publicist behind that. It's just him dishing out his raw thoughts. That was his advantage, right? Whereas if you read a tweet or a post, social media post from your average senator or your average politician, that's not that senator sitting there writing those posts. And so I think the future of ghostwriting is you either go like the very vanilla, safe corporate route where you're putting out content that has viral appeal, okay, that's on the safer side, and like where it's like, yeah, okay, we know that's not Tony Robbins actually sitting there writing those posts. We know it's not whatever politician sitting there writing those posts, and we're cool with that. It's just it's his publicist or it's his ghostwriter, or you have a ghostwriter who's just very good at what he does, and he takes the time to interview the client, to research the client, to nail his tone of voice, to nail his the way he speaks, maybe even incorporate some sort of AI in that research, and he puts out content that's like so authentic that you can't tell if there's a ghostwriter or not. I know for a fact that a lot of the best-selling books that you see that, Michelle Obama wrote this best-selling book. That Michelle Obama's not sitting there freaking sitting there on her MacBook, typing those words, right? I don't think the average person knows that. I'm aware of that. I know it took me a long time to learn that, but I'm pretty sure there's a period of my life where I thought, hey, that new the last U.S. president who just launched that autobiography, he actually sat down and wrote that book. Like, no, it's his ghostwriter.
Yeah, I remember learning that James Patterson has a writing machine for him. At this point, he doesn't even write his own novels anymore. He just built this process to teach other people how to follow this framework of publishing a James Patterson novel. So he's a little bit different because he is a writer. He did start his own stuff. But the point I'm trying to make is, like the veil on my eyes was uncovered, I suppose is the expression, as well when I learned that, where it's like, whoa, there is a whole lot more to this than people sitting on a typewriter and like expressing their truest creative self, right? Fascinating. And I totally agree. Like, I drastically underestimated what creating an audience on social media meant and how hard it was. And one of my advantages and also one of my curses in life is that I'm like too Scottish and too Philly and just too stubborn to quit stuff. I'm just like a mule. And so I was like, I can't quit this. I have to figure out how to do it. And so luckily, it's been working. And it's one of the most powerful assets I've been able to develop is my audience on social media, but still specifically on Twitter. What were your expectations coming in? And like, what surprised you the most? Sorry to cut you off, but like, I need to know that. No, it's fine. I really appreciate it. My expectation coming in was that the organic aspect of it would happen similar to blogging, where it's like, if I just keep doing this, eventually people will find me. And that isn't the case with social media. The case with social media is that you have to like get in the action, right? You can't just be on the sidelines and put good stuff out there. And then through organic search and just through people's natural questions that they have, they'll discover you. That you don't really get discovered on social media the same way that you do online. You get, I don't know if there's a different word for it, because like, of course you're being discovered, but you get discovered through like active participation. You have to be in the party, you have to be on the dance floor. And so that was absolutely the realization for me, that it took me like a year and a half to figure that out. And then when I did, I start getting into threads, and then you start playing the game a little bit. Like you call up your friend. Like I remember calling Ethan when he was doing the hustle. I was like, man, I just wrote this really long thread about local media sites, and I know that you've been working on this stuff with the hustle. Like, is there any chance that you guys could feature this in your newsletter? And instead of featuring a blog post, like he featured a thread, right? And that one thing alone, I remember getting 1,000 followers. I was sitting on my back porch when I lived in Nashville and seeing it. And that was definitely one of those click moments where it's like, oh, okay, I don't just write stuff and get discovered. Like I write stuff and then I get in on the action. And that for sure was the biggest lesson I learned.
Yeah, I think people, it sounds so simplistic, right? Because it's literally written in the name, social media. Like the media is social. And it's very easy for people to fall in love with the gimmicks, the algorithm, the features. I've always, and I've definitely fallen into that trap. But like what I always try and do is like I always try and approach social media from a human behavioral standpoint. Like to me, social media is one of the most fascinating human behavior experiments that we've ever conducted as a society. Overall, has it been more good than bad? I don't know about that. I would argue it's probably on the edge of more damage than it is done more damage than good. But the other day, I remain an optimist. So I do think, I jump back and forth. Like on one hand, like I don't like that it's frying, that TikTok is just literally destroying people's lives from a young age. I hate that. But on the other hand, I was thinking the other day about how like I've literally transformed my health, my physical health and my financial health purely because of social media. Like I learned online business through social media. I learned a lot about my health through social media, about my general sense of well-being. I learned through a bunch of creators who I discovered through social media. So there is that, but like as a society and on a societal level, I'm uncertain whether it's been like a good or a bad experiment. And so like I've always approached social media, like growing on social media, monetizing social media from a behavioral standpoint. If I can give you guys like a little tip on that, like you're going to learn more about Twitter growth and monetization by studying human behavior than you will from like any tactical things.
No question. If it doesn't create an emotional response, it's basically nothing.
Yeah.
I'm not like a FOMO person. I can be, and I'm not by any means saying that that's wrong, because it's very, very effective. I just feel better about myself if I share stories in my life that inspire people, hopefully, or maybe give like a warning. I'm not doing, like doom posting. It's more so like, hey, this was a mistake I made. And so sure, like the emotion is fear, but it's just more subtle, and it's not intentionally trying to make people fearful. So I agree with you there. I'm with you though. Like I'm optimistic every time I start to. Don't get me started on TikTok. TikTok is like poison, and I really, really mean that.
Dude, I refuse. I don't know if I'm just the old man, but like I just refuse to use it. Everyone keeps telling me you got to put your videos on TikTok. I'm like, I download the app and I delete it. I open it for like 2 seconds and I just think, no, this is just cancer for your brain.
It is. I agree with you there. All right, man. So let's start wrapping this thing up. I have a closing tradition on this podcast. When you see how far you've come, and when you get done your work on an average day, and you tap in for the night, you're eating your dinner, you're putting your head on your pillow, what is the big vision that you are seeing for yourself? This idealist version that you're going for, that you don't tell anybody, right? Like, what's the secret dream that you keep to yourself that sometimes you dream about and you think it could possibly happen? Where are you going?
Oh man, my long-term vision, I've never mentioned this publicly in a podcast, but like one day I will write a work of fiction. I know it's like when I was a kid, I've always been like into story. That's why story is like a big theme in my content. My first story love was 90s movies, 80s and 90s movies. So I was and still am a big Steven Spielberg fan.
Of
I'll
course.
never forget watching Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom for the first time as like a little kid and like being blown
Me
away by
too.
that.
When he ripped his heart out, I like know
Oh, dude,
exactly where I
it's
was.
like
I can
just like
smell it.
the the scene on the bridge when he's like to chop up the bridge. Oh my god, it still gets me every time. And so like I've always been drawn towards stories. And then my second love when I started getting older was like reading books and reading novels. And I've always been drawn towards text and writing, as you know. And I think that the reason why I was so drawn towards copywriting and business writing is because I love to write. And I think that in many ways, and no offense to copywriters and marketers, but I think in my personal case, I went to copywriting as a way to make a living because I didn't have the balls to do fiction writing from the get go. So now that I'm pretty confident that my business is generating good cash flow. Now I finally have the confidence to be like, you know what? On the side, I'm going to start working my novel. And so like that's what I think about when I go to bed every night. Like my long-term vision is like I want to be an author. I want to write my own books. The marketing stuff really it was just a way for me to get confidence in my own writing ability. And I know it sounds a little cheesy, but like I think that's really what's been going on my mind lately.
Wonderful. I love to hear that. Have you ever read The Library at Mount Char?
The what? Sorry?
The Library at Mount Char. I'll send it to
No.
you. It's a book that I'm recommending to everybody these days.
Yeah.
I've never read anything like it. It fucking just exploded my brain. I couldn't stop talking about it. So yeah, I'll grab your address when we get off. I'll send you that book. It's called The Library at Mount Char. It's so good. You're gonna
I
love
would
it.
appreciate that. And here's a little fun fact, Tim. And this is where it really tied together for me. I discovered a lot of my favorite authors. They were all copywriters. They worked at like massive ad agencies. Cormac McCarthy, probably he died recently. One of my favorite American author of all time. He worked for a period in an ad agency. There's
With the
another
road,
author.
right?
Yeah.
He
Don
died?
DeLillo, he died like a few months ago. Yeah, he was old. He was
Yeah.
like in the 90s.
No way.
But a ton of authors, like a surprising amount of authors, they all got their start in advertising. And I've always had the suspicions because with advertising, with copywriting, there is a little bit of creativity involved in coming up with angles and coming up with hooks and discovering the big idea. The process, I think it's similar to fiction writing in that you're coming up with an idea, you're creating some sort of story around it, except, in fiction, you're selling the characters, you're selling the world, whereas like in advertising, you're selling a product. But there's always like some sort of story, some sort of narrative behind that. And I think a lot of them, they did advertising as a way to pay the bills, but their dream was always to like, tell stories. And so I see myself in a similar light. Like, my long-term vision, like I like marketing, but like, it's not my dream,
Yeah, that's amazing. I've always thought it's because of the deadlines. Like copywriters have to hit deadlines, and creative writers, it's hard to finish work, right? Because like, what do you do when you can do anything? And so I've always thought that the reason why those copywriters transform, or what's the word? Not transform. Like it caters itself well to fiction writers is simply because they're good at like sitting down and actually writing, and then showing up the next day and sitting down and like finishing. So I agree, man. All right, this was like one of the longest episodes I've ever done. I had so much fun talking to you, Eddy. Thank you so much. I'll send you that book. When you publish your book, please be sure to let me know. I will be the first one to buy it.
Hell yeah.
And then crap. So Twitter is at War on Weakness, I believe, is your handle.
Yes.
And then to join your email list, I think it's join.eddyquan.com, right?
Yes, sir.
Amazing. All of that will be linked up in the show notes. To see the show notes for this podcast, go to copybloggerpod.com. You can sign up for the email list. We have like a really awesome newsletter here because we break the podcast down into some bite-sized quotes. So if you don't have time to listen to the whole episode, you can read the newsletter and get some of the best parts in the written format like we just talked about. So Eddy, once again, man, I enjoyed every second of talking to you. Thank you so much, and I look forward to reading your book.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Tim. Thanks for having me.